Rachel hadn't felt this happy in a long time. It's truly amazing how you find more joy in the happiness of your child than in your own. Life is strange in that way, prioritizing the happiness of others over your own. Today, Grace is getting married. And to whom? To a wonderful young man. Sean immediately won Rachel over. He had a solid education, something to do with computers, a profession that will always provide. Kind, smart, and well-mannered, coming from a good family, Grace simply radiates happiness by his side. And that's what matters most. Even if he were a simple mechanic, Rachel would have loved him just the same, seeing her daughter's joyful eyes. The only sorrow was Deacon's absence from his daughter's wedding. The grudge he held against his ex-wife was too strong to overcome. Nothing could be done about it. Such is life. Rachel tried talking to him, wrote letters, made phone calls, but to no avail. Deacon felt that Rachel had robbed him. Yet she had only taken what was rightfully hers, not even for herself, but for Grace. But the man couldn't understand, seemingly forgetting how his business started and who was there to help him, who stayed up nights with the paperwork, and who carried bags of goods to their small shop they once opened together at the local market. Thinking about her ex-husband was the last thing Rachel wanted. He was her ex for a reason, not worth her tears. Besides, everything turned out well for him. He married his Elle. He had everything he needed for happiness, except for a daughter. But that was his choice. Grace was spinning around the hall with Sean, the first dance of the bride and groom, now husband and wife. Oh, how quickly time flies. It seemed like just yesterday her daughter was sitting on her lap, eating porridge from a spoon. It felt like just yesterday she was taking her to her first day of school. Those huge bows on her thin braids seemed so silly to Rachel. But now, instead of bows, Grace wore a veil. Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes. "Hey, Mom, what's wrong?" Tracy, her best friend, nudged Rachel slightly. We agreed, no crying. "Oh, sorry." Rachel wiped away a tear and sniffed. "When did they grow up?" "Yeah, I wonder that myself." Tracy waved dismissively. "I feel like I just brought my own home from the hospital yesterday, and now he's finishing school. He's taller than me now, and I still see those 50 centimeters and 3.5 kilograms. Can you believe it?" Rachel felt she was about to burst into tears. "Oh, I remember how you met me from the maternity hospital." "All right, Mom, let's grab some water." Tracy hooked Rachel's arm. "I see you're about to start crying." Rachel nodded and followed Tracy, who poured her some water from a carafe. "Here you go, friend." "Maybe I should have some vodka, huh?" Rachel sobbed.
"Okay, stop," Tracy frowned. "The last thing we need is for you to get drunk at your daughter's wedding. What would I tell Grace? That I didn't keep an eye on you?"
Rachel offered a weak smile and took a few sips of water. It was a relief that no one was paying them any attention. It wasn't unusual, after all, for a sentimental mother to shed tears at her daughter's wedding. Still, Rachel felt a bit embarrassed. And then her gaze landed on a man standing in a corner with a cane. He was watching the dancing couple and smiling thoughtfully. Handsome, with distinguished graying temples and deep lines on his face that seemed too profound for his age. Rachel's heart started to beat faster. "Who is that?" she whispered. Tracy glanced at the man. "No idea. Must be from the groom's side, I guess, since you don't know him." "Why?" "Probably nothing. Just mistook him for someone else." Rachel wrapped her fingers around her wrist, where her favorite bracelet, a slender chain with a delicate heart, dangled. It was a simple silver trinket, worth next to nothing. But Rachel had not parted with the bracelet for many years, not for a single moment. "What's with you, Rachel? You look like you've seen a ghost," Tracy said, concerned, looking at her friend. "Oh, probably did." Rachel flicked her hair. "Sorry, I must be going crazy from all the excitement." "All right, keep drinking your water, and don't you dare cry, your mascara will run," Tracy advised. Rachel took another sip and looked back at the man with the cane. No, it couldn't be him. It just couldn't, because the man she had once loved with all her heart, and as it turned out, for a lifetime, had been dead for a long time. It was just a striking resemblance, nothing more. But why then did her heart beat so wildly? Why did Rachel feel an urge to both cry and laugh at the same time? She closed her eyes and, for some reason, saw a train station before her inner eye. that trip which had forever changed her life. 25 years ago, Rachel had always detested train stations. For some reason, they had been associated with farewells since her childhood. At the station, she had seen off her brother to the army, and since then, she had never seen him again. He got married in another city, then moved abroad with his family. At the station, Rachel bid farewell to her father as he went on his endless business trips, and he too never returned from one of them. He had met someone else. Such is life. Rachel was only 10 years old then, and she remembered her father in a warm jacket, nervously smoking and not looking at her mother. Meanwhile, she stood, staring at the toes of her boots, as tears ran down Rachel's cheeks. Later, she learned. Her mother had suspected then that her father had a mistress, and her heart told her she would never see her husband again. And now it was Rachel's husband, Deacon, seeing her off at the station. The train had already arrived at the platform, and there were only 10 minutes left until departure. Rachel watched her husband, unsure of what to say. "I'm sorry it turned out this way," Deacon unexpectedly said. "I understand everything. After all, I'm supposed to be the breadwinner, and here I am." "Let it go," Rachel sighed. "Things happen. Many people lose their jobs. I'll find something. I'll start flipping clothes." Deacon's eyes sparkled. "They say you can flip fur coats too. Good coats sell well." "Well, give it a try," Rachel smiled softly at him. "But you need money to buy those coats, you know?" Deacon's face fell. Rachel felt sorry for him. Poor thing. Like many, he had lost his job. He used to be an engineer, a respected person, passionate about his profession, and Rachel was a simple music teacher. She didn't earn much, of course, but felt she was fulfilling an important mission, opening the world of art to children. What joy it was when her student won first place in a competition. How delightful to see a child transform from a novice into a little professional, finding joy in playing the piano. And Rachel herself loved to play. Music was her life and her soul. Rachel thought it would always be like this. But then times changed. Her husband and dozens of his colleagues were laid off. And at the music school, they simply stopped paying salaries. It's November now, and last month she was only paid for June. Deacon tried for a long time to find work, but was rejected everywhere. He worked as a loader for a couple of weeks. For him, it was a real blow to his pride. He was an engineer with higher education and vast experience, reduced to hauling dirty barrels or sacks. The man quickly hurt his back and resigned. Then Deacon sold dresses and t-shirts at the market but failed, and then his stall was even robbed. So Deacon ended up owing a large sum to the stall owner. This is why Rachel had to go to another city for temporary work. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to pay off the debt. Their family had no savings. Rachel found temporary work through a newspaper ad. A local confectionery factory needed packers. She called and offered her services. She got a positive response. And here she was at the station, clutching a purse to her chest, containing her passport and a small amount of money for the initial period. Almost all the money they had. But the job promised good pay, and she might even manage to work for 3-4 months. If she saved, the earnings could last almost half a year. And after that, time would tell. These are uncertain times. No one makes long-term plans. Even if things are looking up, you never know what the future holds. Just yesterday, for instance, a businessman who owned a chain of restaurants in the city center was killed. He had everything: money, his own business, and several apartments. And now he's gone. His estate will now be divided. Maybe other people will die in the process of this division. Many people. Sometimes Rachel even felt relieved that they were just ordinary people. Yes, she had to count the pasta before throwing it into the pot, and she knew how to stretch a single chicken over 10 days, but at least there was less risk. And these dark times had to end eventually. But how hard it is not to have the means to buy your own daughter, say, a box of chocolates or a new dress. Such a little fashionista she is, spending hours trying on her dresses in front of the mirror and making funny faces. Oh, Grace. And Rachel so wished to spoil her to buy the toys Grace looked at with such a sad, grown-up gaze. But it's either a new toy or that cursed chicken. Rachel forced a smile and looked into her husband's eyes. Deacon, it'll be all right. This is all temporary. I get it, he grimaced. I'm tired of this poverty. What kind of man am I, sending you off to work, huh? A good man. Rachel rose on her tiptoes and pecked her husband on his stubbly, prickly cheek. Later on, you'll be earning big money, and you'll buy me a fur coat and a diamond ring. Passengers, the train is departing, announced the speakers loudly. Well, goodbye. Rachel hugged her husband one last time and jumped into the carriage. Deacon, take care of Grace. Her medicine is in her dresser, and make sure she wears her hat. She takes it off when she's out playing. But she can't be doing that. Deacon nodded bewilderedly, watching his wife. Rachel was barely holding herself together. This was her first long separation from her daughter. It felt to her like a betrayal of her child. But not going wasn't an option. The debt was mounting. And so, the woman had no choice. She had promised to be with Deacon in sorrow and in joy, and she intended to keep that promise. She settled into her seat. Tears streamed down her cheeks unbidden. Rachel felt incredibly sorry for herself. She had lost her beloved job, had to travel to another city to earn money through hard labor. She wouldn't see her daughter for at least a month. She wondered how Grace would handle her absence. The little girl had cried all evening yesterday, begging her mother not to leave. It had been decided not to take her to the station, lest she throw a tantrum. Rachel sobbed. Lord, why all this? What's wrong? Rachel looked up to see a plump woman with hair dyed black. She was dressed in a bright striped sweater that snugly fit her ample bosom. Her hair curled in rings. It's nothing, I'm all right, Rachel smiled. All is well. Uh-huh, I can see how well. The woman frowned. Come on, spill it. It'll feel better. Where are you headed? I'm going to Forest Town. Rachel started gazing out the window to staunch her tears. I found a job there. Left my husband and daughter at home. She felt like crying again. Don't cry. The woman patted Rachel on the shoulder. Life is like this now. Look at me. Changed 3 jobs in a year. 3. And now I'm off to my 4th, and here I am alive and kicking. I've grown strawberries, worked in a store, and even as a cleaner. I used to teach music, Rachel sighed. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, music's not much of a priority now, and the woman shook her head. By the way, my name's Gary. Rachel introduced herself as well. A smooth conversation followed. It turned out that Gary divorced her husband 3 years ago and is now looking for a man. She's even chatting with 2. Gary showed her travel companion their letters. It turned out both were in prison. Rachel decided not to ask if Gary considered this method of finding a partner safe, but she herself would never risk it for anything. Rachel also told her own story, although what was there to tell? A typical fate. Born into a family of a teacher and a geologist. From childhood she adored music, graduated from music school, and then the conservatory. In her final year, she met Deacon and fell in love with him. They got married. Grace was born. A typical fate. You couldn't write a novel about someone like Rachel, not even a short story. Everything was just like everyone else. They talked until late into the night, then Rachel put her purse under her head and fell fast asleep. Jerry did too. Rachel woke up in the early morning. There were still 4 hours of travel ahead. She stretched and then decided to go wash up. Gary was nowhere to be found, nor was her suitcase. Rachel regretted not saying goodbye. Perhaps Gary got off at the last station. Rachel spent the rest of the journey pensively gazing out the window, pondering what to do next. She needed to call her future workplace right away. They promised to provide directions to the factory. Then, she needed to find accommodation in the dormitory. Rachel had never lived in a dormitory before, so she was a little nervous. And she absolutely had to call her husband, Deacon. He must be terribly worried about her. And, of course, she needed to hear Grace's voice, her daughter's, just as long as she didn't cry. Rachel was afraid it would break her heart. Finally, the train arrived at the destination city. Rachel put on her jacket, grabbed her suitcase, and stepped onto the platform. Then she slowly walked, hunching her shoulders every time a gust of chilly November wind hit her. Inside the station building, a terrible realization dawned on her. There was neither wallet nor passport in her bag. Rachel emptied it right onto the floor and frantically began rummaging through her belongings. A handkerchief, lipstick, a powder compact she bought back in conservatory days, some cheap candies, and that was it, nothing more. Oh, and a few bits and bobs tucked under the lining. Rachel even checked her suitcase just in case. Maybe she transferred them and forgot about it. But there was no wallet there either. Her mouth went dry. For some reason, her whole body started trembling with a fine tremor, as if an electric current had passed through it. Okay, don't panic. Lord, it's Gary. She even asked if Rachel was carrying money with her, supposedly worried if she had enough for the initial period, and Rachel, like a complete idiot, said she had money, even mentioned the amount. And now this Gary is nowhere to be found. And no one will bother looking for her. The police have more serious matters to attend to. Rachel made her way to the waiting area and sat down on a bench. She thought for a while, took a deep breath, as her mother taught her. She believed that deep breathing was a panacea for all ills, from headaches to severe anxiety. Feeling a bit calmer, Rachel approached a young policeman standing near the ticket counters and explained her situation. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "They won't find this Gary of yours. She probably traveled on a fake passport." "No, I can send out the information. Just don't expect much." The policeman's face expressed sincere sympathy, which made Rachel want to cry even more. "Can I make a call somewhere? After all, I came here to get a job. Maybe it'll work out?" Rachel pleaded. "What will work out? Without a passport? Are you serious?" sighed the policeman. "Hardly. Now you need at least a temporary ID, otherwise you won't be able to go home." Rachel imagined herself sitting on the ground at the entrance to the station with a sign saying, "Robbed on the train, documents stolen, please help with food." The thought made her feel sick, and her head spun, but she managed to stay on her feet. "Can I make a call, please? At least to my husband?" she pleaded. "Yes, come with me." The policeman nodded toward a small door. "There's a friend of mine there. She'll let you make a free call, but then we'll see." First, Rachel called the factory. Her contact there was pleased, but upon hearing that Rachel's passport had been stolen, she darkened. "I won't be able to process your paperwork, not even with a temporary ID. That's our policy," she sighed. "And we can't offer you accommodation in the dormitory either. We had a case recently, a similar situation. We took her in. But then our girl's jewelry started disappearing." "But I'm not going to steal jewelry," Rachel said, flustered. "Yes, we understand that, but we still can't trust a stranger." "Oh, I'm sorry. Listen, Rachel, right? I really can't help you with anything. It's the director's directive." Rachel hung up the phone and stared at the wall. Great, so she won't get the job. "Can I call my husband?" she asked the woman sitting at the desk, pretending to look at some magazine. In reality, the woman was listening with interest to Rachel's conversation. "Yes, go ahead, call," the woman smiled. Deacon, after listening to Rachel, seemed to despair. "Oh God, I was counting on that money so much," he sighed. "Rachel, what are we going to do? I won't even be able to buy you a return ticket." "Deacon, I don't know," Rachel sobbed. "I'm sorry, I'm such a fool. I should have hidden the money in my bra or something." "Yeah, you should have thought about that," her husband said with unexpected aggression. "You're a grown woman, always some problem or another. How are we going to pay off the debt now?" "Deacon, it's your debt," Rachel blurted out. "Fine, I get it. I'll try to find the money," her husband said. "Call me back in the evening." Disheartened, Rachel returned to the waiting area. The policeman brought her a cup of hot tea and a cheese sandwich. Rachel thanked him wholeheartedly and ate. What was up with Deacon? Why was he so angry? Was she to blame for what happened? Although maybe she was, she should have hidden the money better and not tell everyone she met about the amount she had. Deacon's frustration was understandable. He had been on edge lately. Thinking about his debt, trying to earn but unable to find a way to get the money, Rachel touched her earlobe. Mom's golden earrings. The last memory. She had to pawn everything else, but she couldn't bring herself to sell the earrings. Her mom loved them dearly, wore them to important concerts and on holidays. Her mom had been gone for 5 years now, and Rachel wore those earrings without ever taking them off. Maybe she could pawn them too, and give the money to the conductor. Maybe she'd allow her to sit quietly somewhere, at least until she got home. Rachel sat next to the phone booth installed right in the station building. She didn't even have the money to make a call. How unlucky she was to get into such trouble, going for work. You couldn't say anything. Deacon was right. Rachel was an artist, not adapted to modern harsh life. She was born in the wrong era. All she knew was pressing keys. And who needs that now? An elderly woman in a long coat and a beret approached the phone booth. The beret caught Rachel's attention. It shone brightly in the light of dim lamps hanging from the ceiling. The woman dialed a number. "Mindy, where are you? I've been waiting here for an hour and you're still not here. What do you mean you're not coming? Do you realize you've let me down? I recommended you, respected people, mind you. Do you want this job or not?" Rachel became wary. The woman started yelling. "Mindy, I recommended you. They've been looking for a housekeeper for a long time. I arranged everything and you? What do you mean your husband won't let you? Oh God, couldn't you discuss this issue earlier?" She slammed the receiver. Rachel noticed how tightly her fists clenched. Suddenly, Rachel understood that she couldn't miss this chance. She grabbed her suitcase and almost ran after the lady in the red beret. She caught up with the elderly woman on the street. "I'm sorry, excuse me." Rachel touched her on the shoulder. "Yes?" The woman turned around and smiled faintly. "I'm really sorry." "Yes?" "I accidentally overheard your conversation. The thing is, I really need a job, you see. My documents and money were stolen on the train." "And what do you want from me?" The woman looked at Rachel as if she were crazy. "Well, I thought if some Mindy didn't show up, maybe I could, but well, it's probably silly." Rachel couldn't hold back and burst into tears. She must have gone crazy. Here she was, running after people, begging for a job, all alone, far away from her husband and daughter. But then, the woman unexpectedly gave Rachel a comforting pat on the shoulder. "Dear, please don't cry." "What's wrong?" "Nothing terrible happened. Everyone is alive. And about your offer, you see, this is a very respected family. They're looking for a housekeeper. I'm acquainted with the wife of the house owner. I promised to help, and the girl I found didn't show up. I'm good," Rachel sniffled childishly. "I used to work as a music teacher in a music school then. They just stopped paying. I came to the factory. Without documents, they won't hire me, and my documents were stolen. I've told you before, you can call my previous workplace. They'll confirm everything. They know me there, really. There were even articles in the newspapers about my students." The woman smiled widely. "All right, calm down, I believe you." "Really?" Rachel's eyes widened. "Let's talk a little at a cafe, and then we'll figure out how to help you. By the way, my name is Phyllis." "Oh, I'm sorry, but I don't have any money." Rachel sighed sadly. "I can't even afford to buy tea." "Well, I can buy you tea," Phyllis winked. "I like your persistence. But you understand, if something goes missing from the house, I'll have problems." Yes, of course," Rachel hastily nodded. "And I don't need tea. Why would you spend money?" They talked for over an hour. Phyllis asked Rachel detailed questions about her family, education, and work experience. Rachel even found her old music school ID in her bag, at least some form of identification. Finally, Phyllis delivered her verdict. "I like you. I like that you decided to seize the opportunity, so I'm willing to help you. I'll explain the situation to Catherine. She's a kind woman and will be willing to accommodate you, especially since you're recommended by me. But tell her that you, Rachel that you're the daughter of my school friend. Let's call her Sarah. All right? Or no, not daughter. You're her niece." "Yes, Sarah's niece. You came from the city. More accurately, to the city from the village. You lost your documents. You have no money." "But what if she finds out?" Rachel was scared. "Well, I don't think she will." Phyllis looked thoughtfully at her companion. "She's not interested in you, believe me. She's just looking for a girl to help around the house. And by the way, I should tell you up front, the house is big. 2 floors with an attic and a basement. They have a gym in the basement. Catherine's husband and sons use it. Anyway, there's cleaning, washing, baths, sometimes yard work. I must say there's a lot of work, but they'll pay well, but there are 2 conditions." "What are they?" Rachel became wary. "The first, of course, is not to steal." Phyllis pursed her lips. If something goes missing, you'll be fired immediately. Catherine had a bad experience with this before. A girl from an agency came, and then her gold watch disappeared. Well, I think you, being a sensible woman, won't steal. And the second condition. The second? Don't flirt with Catherine's sons. They're two, Lance and Mark. But then again, you're married too. You have a child. I don't think you, Rachel, would try anything like that. No, of course, I won't even try, the woman promised. I love my husband. Why would I do that? Well, that's excellent, Phyllis nodded. Well, that's it. Oh yes, you don't have similar experience, so I'll tell you now. Maintain a business-like relationship with the owners. Don't ask unnecessary questions. Don't wander around the house. In the morning, go to the mistress, get your tasks for the day, complete them, and then you can be free. They'll assign you a room. It's small, but it has everything for living, even a shower cabin, so the conditions are even better than in your dorm, where you didn't get in. Yes, thank you, I'm ready. Rachel couldn't believe her luck. Had she really landed a job? And in such a manner, too. Deacon would have a good laugh when he found out how she managed it. Well then, let's go. I've got my car. Phyllis rose from her chair. Catherine has been waiting for us, though she's been waiting for Mindy, but I'll be bringing Rachel. An hour later, they arrived at the house where Catherine lived. Rachel couldn't believe her eyes. It seemed they were in an elite community. Luxurious cottages, surrounded by neat little fences. Here and there, in the yards, Rachel even spotted fountains and plaster statues. Rachel felt a tinge of sadness. She and Deacon would never live in such a cottage. They were crammed into a tiny apartment, with no prospects of moving to a better one in the foreseeable future. And there was the constant worry of losing even that, given Deacon's debt had to be paid off. The car stopped in front of one of the cottages. Rachel caught her breath. 2 stories, stone cladding, a roof covered in tiles. Could she, even as a housemaid, live in such luxury for a while? Let's go. Phyllis got out of the car and smiled at Rachel. Caught your eye, did it? Yep, Rachel admitted honestly. It's beautiful. They passed through the gates and headed to the house along a neat pathway. It was apparent that the garden was somewhat neglected, with rotting leaves not cleaned up and blackened fruits lying under the only apple tree. The women ascended the porch. Phyllis rang the doorbell. Rachel shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. Her idea was starting to seem foolish to her. Yes, this Catherine would now kick her out as soon as she saw her. A stranger from the streets, without documents or money, who had arrived from nowhere and wanted to work, especially in such a house. The door opened. Rachel saw a tall, slender woman in her 60s. Clearly, Catherine did everything to maintain her figure. She was dressed in an elegant suit, a pencil skirt, and a houndstooth patterned jacket. Phyllis, I've been waiting, Catherine smiled. Traffic jams? No, Catherine, please don't be surprised. Mindy didn't show up. But I met Rachel, and here she is in front of you. I think this girl will do. Catherine eyed Rachel with surprise. And how do you know her, Phyllis? Rachel, Sarah's niece, maybe you remember her? Phyllis answered, Imagine. Sarah calls me yesterday, says her niece has arrived. But she got robbed on the train. No documents or money. The girl is good, and now she's looking for work. Maybe you can take her in, at least until she can get her passport sorted out. Catherine frowned slightly. But Phyllis, I was planning to hire a girl for the long term. I can work long term, Rachel blurted out, feeling her only chance slipping away. I can work as long as needed, even for a year. Catherine's face broke into an unexpected smile. What am I to do with you? Come in, we'll have some tea, let's talk. And Rachel, hardly believing her ears, asked again, You're hiring me? I'll give it a try. Catherine stepped aside to let them into the house. But just so you know, there will be a trial period of 1 month. After that, we'll sign a contract. Of course, the trial period will be paid well, unless something happens that I don't like. Catherine led the guest to the kitchen, which resembled more of a spaceship than a kitchen. Rachel had never seen such appliances. Even the microwave was on the table, and a coffee maker, exactly like in the TV series Rachel occasionally watched on cable. Life in those series seemed beautiful, but utterly unattainable. Well, it turns out some people actually manage to get close to that kind of life. Pleased with all of Rachel's answers, Catherine said, "You're free to go for now. Your room is the last one down the corridor. Go left down the corridor, and you'll run straight into it. It's open, and the key is on the table. Make yourself comfortable. Rest. I'll give you an hour and a half, then I expect you here in the kitchen. We'll talk about your duties." Rachel nodded and darted out of the kitchen, clutching the handle of her suitcase, which seemed heavier than before. She had found a job. She definitely wouldn't let herself down. She would do everything perfectly. The entire house would shine, just so they wouldn't kick her out. The room allocated to the house assistant was a bit cramped. It contained a bed, a small wardrobe, a table, and a chair. But it had a window with a view of the backyard. Rachel placed her suitcase down and collapsed onto the bed. Indeed, it had been a long time since she had such an adventure. She was in a wealthy home, about to take care of the household, just like in a TV series. The young beauty conquers the heart of the master, but circumstances keep them apart. And Rachel laughed. She wasn't that young anymore, and she already had a husband and a child. Speaking of which, she should ask Catherine if she could call home. Deacon is probably worried. As Rachel told Phyllis, the house even had a private shower stall, complete with a neatly folded towel in the cupboard. Rachel thoroughly enjoyed her shower, then dressed in clean trousers and a blouse. She thought working in such attire would be challenging. Perhaps she was supposed to wear some sort of uniform. An hour and a half later, Rachel entered the kitchen where Catherine was waiting for her, sipping tea. Another cup and a plate of cookies were also on the table. "Please have a seat." Catherine motioned to a chair. "So, have you settled into your room?" "Yes," Rachel nodded. "Thank you so much. I know it's scary to let a stranger into your home, but believe me, I won't let you down." I'm almost certain of that," Catherine smirked. "My husband is a kind and gentle soul, but his reputation is a bit complex, so rest assured, if something goes amiss—" Rachel turned pale. Was Catherine's husband some kind of gangster? And if she were suspected of theft, would they find her body in the river, weighed down with concrete blocks? Catherine burst into laughter. "Did you actually believe that? Don't worry. Benjamin is just a businessman." Rachel, feeling incredibly awkward, stuffed a cookie into her mouth and looked down. "All right, I won't scare you anymore." Catherine smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Rachel found herself admiring her. Some women age so gracefully, and Catherine was definitely one of them. "So, Rachel, have your tea and listen up. The kitchen needs to be cleaned twice daily, morning and evening. We have a chef who comes in, but cleaning is not part of his duties, only cooking. If Albert, the chef, needs you, he'll let you know. Lance and Natalie's room is on the second floor. It needs cleaning once a day, but only when Lance is at work and Natalie is out. Don't rummage through drawers or closets unless a sked. Naturally, you'll need to clean the bathroom as well. Also on the second floor is Mark's room and his workshop. Do not enter his workshop. Heaven forbid Mark sees you there. You don't need to clean his room. I'll handle that." "Yes, understood," Rachel nodded. "I doubt you'll even see Mark. He spends his days painting, so he won't bother you. Your job includes cleaning my husband's office, too. Do not touch his desk. Benjamin gets terribly upset if anyone moves his papers, and only he knows their correct place. So we're clear on that. Regarding the garden, it's also your responsibility. No need to plant anything, just keep the leaves cleared as needed. And of course, maintain cleanliness in your own bedroom and shower. That's it." Rachel pondered. Yes, it was a lot of work, but she was up for the challenge. After all, she desperately needed the money. "Rachel, about the hallways. You need to mop the floors there once a day, and that should be enough. And please don't touch the antiques, vases, statues, candle holders." Catherine squinted. "All of it is worth a fortune, Rachel." "I have one request." Rachel tapped her cup nervously with her fingers. "May I call my husband, just to let him know I've settled in?" "There's a phone on the first floor near the door. That's the one you can use." Catherine nodded. "I hope you won't abuse the privilege of making calls." Rachel nodded in agreement. Well, that was something. At least she could call Deacon now and then. That day, Catherine let Rachel rest from her journey. Before heading to her room, Rachel called her husband. He listened to his wife and skeptically asked, "Rachel, and they just took you on like that?" "Yes, yes, imagine that," she replied excitedly. "It's like a miracle. In 6 months, we'll have paid off our debt." "All right then, make sure you do your best. Jobs are scarce back here in our town." "And how's Grace, Deacon?" Rachel inquired. "Yeah, Grace is fine. She's playing," the man briefly replied. "All right, go on now." Rachel spent the rest of her day sitting on the windowsill, gazing thoughtfully out the window. She felt like the heroine of a novel, hardly believing she had the courage to approach Phyllis. Typically, Rachel was shy, fearful of strangers. It was even surprising to many that she ended up with Deacon. Many of her friends doubted Rachel would ever find her other half. Perhaps it was because her father was a reserved, unsociable man, leaving Rachel inept at interacting with the opposite sex. Yet here she was, making such a bold move. But it was all worth it. Working in Catherine's home, Rachel would earn more than at the factory, enabling her to return home sooner. After some thought, Rachel took out a photograph of Grace from her suitcase and placed it on the desk, leaning it against a thick detective novel she had brought for the journey. She would need to buy a frame. Rachel went to bed and, looking at her smiling daughter, fell asleep. The next day, as promised, she got up at 6 in the morning, took a shower, and put on the uniform Catherine had provided, trousers and a t-shirt. Then she went to start her new job. In the kitchen was Albert. It turned out he was a portly man in his 50s, with a charming smile and a bald head. "Oh, mademoiselle, I was informed of your arrival." The chef placed a cup in front of Rachel and said, "Try the coffee, Arabica with subtle citrus notes and a pleasant bitterness." Rachel took a sip and closed her eyes in pleasure. It was nothing like the instant coffee from a jar. The taste played and shimmered as if it wasn't a flavor at all, but a melody. "Oh, thank you so much." "It's nothing. Do come by. I'm always happy to treat a beautiful woman." Albert winked playfully. Rachel blushed and felt her cheeks flush. "Don't get me wrong," the chef started as he cracked huge white eggs into a bowl. "I'm not flirting. I've been happily married for a long time, but I can pretend for our mutual enjoyment and morale. But nothing more than compliments, don't worry." "Well, that suits me fine," nodded Rachel. "And you don't have to clean up after I prepare breakfast. I'll get straight to lunch," Albert said as he vigorously whisked the eggs. His hand moved so fast that Rachel couldn't take her eyes off him. He seemed not so much a chef as a true magician. "Thank you. I'll head to the second floor then." "I'd wait if I were you and meet the owner," advised Albert. "Benjamin will soon come down to try the traditional morning omelet. He's quite an interesting person, I must say." "Interesting?" Rachel inquired. "Oh, an understatement." Albert poured the eggs onto a heated skillet, and a divine aroma filled the kitchen. He clearly added some spices to the omelet. Rachel firmly decided to find out which ones exactly. "Good morning, Albert." A tall, slender man in a reindeer sweater and baggy jeans entered the kitchen. The man sat down next to Rachel and winked at her. "New here?" he asked. "Yes." Rachel nodded. "I'll be assisting." "Assisting is good." Benjamin interlocked his fingers and stared out the window. "It's wonderful. Tell me, what were you before you ended up here?" "I was a music teacher," Rachel responded. "Respectable," nodded Benjamin. "I myself taught higher mathematics, but then it turned out my knowledge could be applied better, or rather, more lucratively. Now I consult for respectable people and have become a respectable person myself, as you see." "That's amazing," Rachel admired. "Is it a tough job?" "You know, thinking is generally hard," Benjamin looked at her and smiled. "I must confess, it's easier now than in the university. Fewer silly questions. Albert, I'm about to die of hunger here." "I won't let you die," and the chef placed a plate with an omelet in front of Benjamin. "Enjoy your meal." Benjamin quickly had his breakfast and left. "He's a very smart man," noted Albert, "and he's had a tough fate. I'll tell you more about it if you stay long enough. Can't spill secrets to just anyone. But if we get to know each other better?" Rachel's first day on the job began with diligent effort. She scrubbed in the bathroom, washed the floors, and carefully navigated around stands holding antique vases and statuettes. She met Lance, who appeared to be around 35 years old. Rachel was surprised. Catherine must have had her son quite early. After all, she wouldn't place Catherine a day over 55, at most 60. Lance quickly greeted her and rushed off to work. His wife, Natalie, stayed in their room, and Rachel decided it was best not to disturb her. Mark's room and workshop were locked. Rachel was about to knock, but then remembered Catherine's words about her younger son, Mark. It was best not to intrude. Well, the less work, the better for her. Despite the house's size, Rachel managed to finish the cleaning quickly. She even had time to rake the leaves in the garden into a large pile. The only question that remained was what to do with them. Rachel decided to ask Catherine. Catherine was pleased with Rachel's work. "Clean and quick," she commented. "If you keep this up, we might even sign the contract earlier. As for the leaves, Rachel, pack them into bags. Albert will give them to you, then place them near the fence. The garbage collectors will pick them up." Rachel plunged headfirst into her new life. There was plenty of work. In the evenings, she fell asleep as soon as her head touched the pillow. Lance, Catherine's eldest son, and Benjamin paid her no mind. This didn't bother Rachel in the slightest. She was a housekeeper, after all. Why would he need to engage with her? Catherine remained aloof but was always polite. She thanked Rachel for her work, answered questions, and if there were any remarks to be made, they were delivered in the most tactful manner. Benjamin was friendlier towards Rachel. Surprisingly, Rachel found herself getting along quite well with Natalie, Lance's wife. Natalie didn't at all fit the image of a wealthy man's spouse. Petite and round, with almost childlike chubby cheeks and blonde hair, she exuded a soft, kind presence. They got acquainted when Natalie asked Rachel to clean their room. Rachel dusted the shelves, which were filled with souvenirs, presumably from abroad. Natalie sat at the mirror, applying makeup. Rachel occasionally glanced at her vanity. She had never seen such cosmetics before. The jars and tubes seemed like works of art, especially a compact with intertwined C letters. Rachel had only powder and a cheap lipstick. Deacon had once given her a simple perfume, which Rachel used sparingly, only on special occasions. Grace used to say that her mom smelled like candies and pastries. "How does it look?" Natalie turned to Rachel. "Not too much?" "Beautiful," Rachel sincerely replied. The makeup was indeed gorgeous, especially the eyeshadow shimmering like peacock feathers. "Thank you," Natalie smiled. "Lance complains that I wear too much makeup, but I like it." "I do too." Rachel carefully placed a statuette back on the shelf after dusting it. "It really suits you." "By the way, how do you find it here?" Natalie picked up a brush to apply another layer of powder to her face. "Not bad." Rachel picked up another statuette, this one of a little Indian man with a round, funny belly. "Just not used to it yet." "Weren't you a teacher before or something like that?" Rachel looked at Natalie in surprise. "How did you know?" "It shows," Natalie laughed heartily. "You have that teacher's look." "Did I guess right?" "Yes," Rachel admitted. "I taught at a music school, and my husband was laid off. Well, his position was cut, and I just left because they stopped paying." "Yeah, I understand my mom was laid off too," Natalie confessed. "But Lance is great, he helps her out. Can you believe it? My mom is a milkmaid, and here I am living in this place." "Indeed, you're lucky," Rachel nodded. "It's Lance who's lucky to have me," Natalie smirked. "No matter what Catherine says." "Yes, I agree," the housekeeper politely responded. "Oh, you don't know our whole story." Natalie waved her hand, her nails painted a bright red. "My mother-in-law doesn't really like me, to be honest. I keep telling Lance, let's move out, buy our own apartment, but he doesn't want to. So I just hide from Catherine. Whenever she sees me, she looks at me angrily, really, as if I've stolen something from her." "Well, listen, it's common for mothers-in-law not to like their daughters-in-law. My husband's mother also thinks he could have done better," Rachel said. "Except, when our daughter was born, she warmed up a bit. After all, a granddaughter arrived. But still, she inspected her when I came back from the hospital, almost with a magnifying glass. Probably trying to figure out if I had her with Deacon or some other man." Suddenly, Rachel mentally scolded herself. She couldn't talk to the hosts about her personal life. It's irrelevant. "Well, did you find any resemblance?" Natalie asked, laughing. "Yeah, I did. They even have matching moles," Rachel admitted. although I noticed once how Grace's mother-in-law tried to wipe off a mole from Grace's hand. Probably thought I drew it. Oh my, Natalie sighed. I hope I won't become like that when we have kids and they bring someone home. Honestly, I'm bored. Lance doesn't want me to work, and I obediently obey him as a faithful wife. So, I just blurted it all out. Rachel shrugged. It's nothing serious. No, you don't know everything, Natalie said. There's also this thing with Mark. Maybe if not for that, everything would be normal. I'd move out, Natalie said, staring thoughtfully at her reflection. Ugh, I'm tired of it. I'm drained. Anyway, I'm off. Swing by tonight, we'll chat, and I can read your tarot cards. On cards? Rachel exclaimed. Yeah, I have a friend, she's a gypsy, taught me. I used to do readings for everyone in college, always accurate. Just can't do it for myself. Anyway, after you finish cleaning, just lock the door here. Rachel felt a strange feeling after the conversation with Natalie. Surprising. Natalie should be happy. She has everything. Lots of clothes, makeup, and she lives in a huge house. Yet, she seems unhappy. And what's this story with Mark? Rachel tried to casually find out from the chef, Albert. But he just brushed it off. I don't meddle in their affairs, and I advise you not to either, he told her one morning, as Rachel drank coffee in the kitchen getting ready for a new workday. I've been working here for a long time, and I know a little, of course, but I prefer not to gossip. Sorry, it's just female curiosity, Rachel smiled. I've never even seen Mark. He hardly ever comes out, Albert said quietly. Since all this happened, I don't think he wants to see his brother. You just drink your coffee, lovely lady. I've already told you too much. If Catherine finds out, she won't be pleased. Rachel decided she wouldn't ask any more questions. She'll leave this house as soon as she can pay off Deacon's debt. After all, every family has its skeletons in the closet, especially in wealthy families, and it's better not to pry where you're not asked. Catherine consistently paid Rachel for her work. Every week she received an envelope with money. Rachel kept a little for herself and sent the rest to her husband. She tried to call Deacon every 3 to 4 days. It saddened her a bit that her husband still hadn't found a job. Rachel, what do you suggest that I go buy clothes myself? Deacon asked. I didn't study at the Institute for 5 years for that. And you know yourself, I lack commercial instincts. We've already burnt our fingers once. I won't risk it again, honestly. I don't want to. Let's not talk about it. Rachel didn't argue with her husband. He had been providing for their family for a long time. And now, apparently, it was her turn. It's temporary. Later, he'll find a good job. And maybe he'll actually give her a fur coat and a diamond ring someday. Natalie did indeed invite Rachel over to have her fortune read. Rachel resisted, but Natalie insisted. Well, I'm curious, she laughed. Whether it matches or not, don't you want to know your future? Rachel didn't believe in fortune-telling, but knowing the future wouldn't hurt. However, the cards probably wouldn't answer her questions. Arguing with Natalie was pointless. She found herself a new pastime and decided to go along with it. Natalie took out a deck of weathered cards. They settled on the bed, which was covered with a fluffy pink blanket. Here, look, my friend gave them to me. Gypsy, authentic. You know, the more the deck is used for readings, the more accurate it becomes. Like a clock being wound up or something like that. I didn't know that, Rachel politely replied. The cards flickered in Natalie's hands. Let's do past and future, shall we? Natalie winked. Just tell me if it matches or not. Natalie pulled out 4 cards and laid them on the bed. Okay, I see. I see a man. Good, but unreliable, probably before your husband. Can't rely on such people. You see the 5 of spades. Such a person can betray you at any moment. And you loved him deeply, okay? Another man. Reliable, good, loves you, but you're not meant to be together. Natalie's expression darkened. Well, nothing matched, Rachel confessed. My husband is my first and only, and very, very reliable. And that's why he sent you to work in another city with strangers, right? Natalie looked sharply at Rachel. Isn't that so? Rachel was taken aback. She had never looked at the situation from that angle. Well, it just happened, Natalie. Oh, sorry, I got carried away. Imagined myself a fortune teller. Natalie hastily swept the cards off the bed. You have a good husband? Yes, excellent. And a daughter, too. Want me to show you? Rachel smiled. Yes, I do. Natalie nodded. Let's go to my room, Rachel suggested. Natalie got up from the couch. How old is your daughter? 4. She's such a smart girl. Already reading, knows all her letters, Rachel proudly stated. Just can't count yet, but it's still early. She'll learn. Can only count up to 10 for now, and always skip 6. Rachel suddenly felt sad. Oh, how far away her Grace was right now. Was she missing her? Or had she already forgotten her mom? Sometimes they talked on the phone, and every time Rachel was afraid she would cry and upset her little girl. She terribly missed her daughter, her smiles, curious eyes, her hugs. She couldn't wish her a good night, couldn't kiss her scraped knee, couldn't smell the sweet scent of her hair. What's wrong? You look upset, Natalie asked. Oh, everything's fine, Rachel said and burst into tears. Natalie unexpectedly hugged her. Rachel dropped her head on her shoulder, shaking with sadness, pain, and longing. Natalie stroked Rachel's back and patiently waited. Finally, Rachel managed to pull herself together. Sorry, I just miss her so much. It's okay, Natalie sighed, looking at her with genuine sympathy. You'll go see your daughter soon, right? Maybe in a month, Rachel confessed. Catherine promised me a 3-day break. I'll buy some gifts for your daughter. Natalie took out a handkerchief from her pocket and handed it to Rachel. And everything will be fine, I assure you. Oh, maybe I would be a mom now if... Well, let's go. You'll show me your princess. Rachel felt terribly ashamed of her outburst, but she got even closer to Natalie. She gave Rachel some of her cosmetics, lipstick, mascara, and perfume. A small bottle of Chanel, something Rachel couldn't even dream of. Rachel hid the bottle in her closet. She would use that perfume when she got home. Deacon would be surprised. After a month of work, Catherine allowed Rachel to go see her husband for 3 days. Natalie didn't lie. She bought Grace a Barbie doll. Rachel almost cried with joy. She knew her daughter had been dreaming of such a doll, but she couldn't buy it herself. Deacon met Rachel at the station. Seeing her mom, Grace ran to her. Rachel picked up her daughter and hugged her tightly. She didn't even realize how much she missed her. Deacon approached his wife and kissed her on the cheek. For how long, he asked. Back the day after tomorrow, Rachel replied. The day after tomorrow, Grace said disappointedly. The little girl's lips twisted, her eyes sparkled. Mom, don't go. Sweetheart, I have to work, I'll have to leave. Rachel hugged her daughter even tighter. Sweetheart, it won't be for long. Rachel had no idea it would be so hard. Grace whined that she didn't want to let go of her mom, and even the new doll Natalie bought couldn't cheer her up. Her husband was also gloomy. Listen, maybe this was a stupid idea, he asked when they went to bed. Maybe you'll find something here, Rachel? We've been looking, she replied, snuggling up to her husband's warm side. Deacon, they pay well there, you know, until we get rid of this debt. So it's my fault, right? Deacon interrupted her. Rachel, you wanted me to work. I went. I didn't know the money would be stolen. I'm sorry, she whispered. Deacon, it's not your fault. It's just the way things turned out. The man nodded. Exactly. And don't blame me, this is hard enough for me. Just recently I tried to get a job at the bookstore. They didn't take me, didn't even explain why. I'm doing what I can. Of course. Rachel closed her eyes, inhaling his familiar and comforting scent. Well, let's not dwell on this. I missed you terribly. The next day she decided to tidy up. Perhaps Deacon had completely abandoned the house. What can you expect from him? That's how he was raised. Deacon's mother believed that a man shouldn't do anything around the house. That was the wife's job, period. Deacon could easily starve near a fridge full of food, not even realizing he could heat up soup. And Rachel had taught him how to use the washing machine before she left. She opened the closet and was surprised to find several new men's sweaters and shirts. Some still had tags on them. Rachel looked at the price tags on the shirts and was stunned. Wow, quite expensive. There were also new jeans that Rachel didn't remember at all. At lunch, she asked her husband where he got the new clothes. He shrugged calmly. Well, I'm looking for a job. I need to look decent, right? But you could have found something cheaper. she frowned. Deacon, this money isn't easy for me to come by. Rachel, what's gotten into you? Seriously, I need something to wear. I'll find a job and will only buy things for you, I promise, since it's so important to you. By the way, when you were on maternity leave, I supported you. Deacon raised his voice slightly. Or have you forgotten? I'm sorry, but we need to save, Rachel insisted. One expensive shirt would have been enough. Well, sorry. Deacon put down his fork and leaned back in his chair, looking at Rachel with a mixture of resentment and disdain. Yeah, I forgot. I have no say here. You're the provider here. What's a provider? Little Grace piped up. Sweetheart, let's talk about it later, okay? Rachel said quietly to her husband. Okay, let's talk later, and thanks, I'm full. Deacon got up from the table and went into the living room. A minute later, Rachel heard the news anchor's voice. Apparently, Deacon decided to watch the news. Is Daddy upset? Grace asked, sounding worried. No, sweetheart, Daddy just wanted to relax, Rachel said, struggling to hold back tears as she stroked her daughter's head. Let's go to the park, get some ice cream. How about that? Rachel spent the rest of the day with her daughter. She was happy and almost forgot about the argument with her husband. Maybe she was wrong to scold Deacon over such trivial matters. And the money wasn't that hard to come by for her. The hardest part for her was being away from her loved ones. So what if Deacon bought himself a couple of shirts? Was it worth causing a scandal over it? Certainly not. Throughout the night, Rachel cooked food for her husband and Grace. She made a huge pot of soup, fried some cutlets, and even baked a pie. In the morning, she quietly packed her things, woke up her daughter, kissed and hugged her, warm and sleepy. Then she went to the station. It was better this way. Grace would understand her someday, when she grew up. And Deacon? Deacon understood everything already. It was just hard for him right now. But everything would change. It would definitely change. They just needed to endure a little longer. Rachel tried to distract herself from her sad thoughts by immersing herself in work. She even did a thorough cleaning of the attic and tidied up the guest rooms, which wasn't part of her duties. She spruced up the garden, even managed to uproot 2 stumps on her own, much to the surprise of the homeowner, Benjamin. He even allowed her to organize the bookshelves in his study, something Catherine said none of the previous housekeepers were allowed to do. Rachel was pleasantly surprised. Benjamin had amassed a huge library, classics, modern authors, even rare editions. It was clear that the books had been read. In the margins, Rachel found Benjamin's pencil notes with his thoughts. After she finished, Benjamin appreciated the result. Well, finally some order. I couldn't do it all myself. Do you like to read? He asked. Yes, I love it, Rachel nodded. You have a wonderful collection. If you want, you can take some, Benjamin smiled at her. Of course. Put everything back in place. Take whatever you want. Only Mark and I read in our family. It's a pity that most of these books are practically idle. Rachel was overjoyed. She had loved reading since childhood. And now, living in Benjamin and Catherine's house, she suffered from the absence of books. She even read the detective novel she had taken on the train 3 times. Now, she dedicated her evenings to her favorite pastime, temporarily forgetting about her difficulties, Deacon's debts, and missing her daughter. Everything seemed to be going well. The debt was being paid off. Catherine treated Rachel fairly well. The contract had been signed long ago, but then an event occurred that almost led to Rachel's dismissal. She was cleaning on the 2nd floor. Catherine finally entrusted her with the collection of antiques. Wipe off the dust, but be careful, then mop the floor, the hostess said in the morning. No cleaning agents or powders. This is ancient Chinese porcelain. Rachel enthusiastically got to work. Several stands with vases were placed near Mark's room door. Rachel pondered. She had been here for over a month, and she hadn't seen Mark even once. Maybe the family was carefully hiding him? What if he, like in an old novel, was disfigured by some terrible illness, or was suffering from a mental disorder? And Albert kept silent. But he knew something. Definitely knew, but wouldn't tell her. If only she could persuade the cook to tell her about Mark. It was probably a very interesting story. Rachel was wiping another vase, humming to herself. Suddenly, she noticed a black spot on the wall. Rachel reached for it to wipe it off with a cloth and screamed. It was a spider. Rachel had been terrified of spiders since childhood and couldn't do anything about it. Once she saw a huge spider in the kitchen, she dashed into the corridor and stayed there, waiting for Deacon until late in the evening. Right in her robe and slippers. Deacon teased Rachel for a long time then, saying, "Thanks for not burning down the apartment along with that poor spider." Rachel jerked back sharply and bumped into the stand on which the vase stood. Like in slow motion, the vase flew to the floor. Rachel froze, not even attempting to catch it. She was paralyzed with horror. With a loud crash, the vase shattered, scattering into several dozen shards. Rachel froze. That was it. She would never pay off Catherine and Benjamin, and all because of some spider that mysteriously appeared on that wall. Goosebumps ran down her spine. Rachel covered her mouth with her hand and closed her eyes. Maybe she would open them, and the vase would be back in its place. The door creaked. Rachel opened her eyes. From Mark's room rolled out a wheelchair with a young man sitting in it, dressed in a t-shirt and jeans. His legs were strangely unnaturally twisted, as if they belonged not to him but to a puppet, whose controlling strings had been cut. The man's hair was tied back. Rachel noticed colorful stains on his t-shirt. "What's this?" he asked. "The vase." Rachel pointed to the floor. "I accidentally broke it." "Oh, Mom definitely won't forgive you for this," the man smiled. Rachel found his smile extremely silly and inappropriate. With that vase breaking, her life had just shattered after all. But Mark found something funny about it. "What happened?" Rachel looked around. Catherine approached them. She had already noticed the broken vase. It was evident from her expression, and that expression didn't bode well for Rachel. "So, what happened, I'm asking?" Mark continued to smile, looking at Rachel. Clearly, he was truly crazy. "Rachel, I told you to be careful." Catherine waved her hands. "I thought you were a reasonable person and understood everything. Do you know how much it costs?" I don't know," Rachel mumbled. She wished she could sink into the ground, straight into the fiery lava. She would feel much more comfortable there than in this hallway right now. "Mom, don't scold her," Mark said calmly. "It was me who broke it." "What?" Catherine was surprised. What? I'm saying I broke it. I went to get paints. They're in my room. I accidentally bumped into it. I've been telling you not to keep those stands here. I've bumped into them before, but always managed to catch them. And now it broke. Rachel just came to check if I was okay. She was at the other end of the hallway. Mark shrugged. "So the girl has nothing to do with this. You can fire me if you want." "Rachel, is he telling the truth?" Catherine frowned. True," Rachel nervously swallowed. "Mom, why would I lie to you?" Mark was surprised. "I've never seen this girl in my life. If she broke the vase, I would have told you." Catherine shifted her gaze from Mark to Rachel, who froze like a deer in front of a hunter. Then, suddenly, the woman waved her hand. "Okay, son, I believe you. We'll remove the vases indeed, you were right. Rachel, gather the shards. Maybe we can salvage something." The maid hastily nodded. It was awkward for her to lie to Catherine, but too much depended on this job in her life. Catherine, however, looked skeptically at Rachel. "I believe my son, but if something like this happens again..." The homeowner turned and walked towards the staircase. Rachel watched her with a frightened look, then glanced at Mark, who was still smiling. "Thank you," she said. "Don't mention it," he winked, and Rachel noticed that he had incredibly beautiful colored eyes. Tea-colored, warm, kind. In such eyes one wanted to drown. Rachel shook her head. Probably these thoughts were due to the stress she had just experienced. "All right, have a good day." Mark nodded gallantly, turned his wheelchair and rolled into his room, leaving Rachel alone. It turns out he really is sick. Can't walk. I wonder, is it because of an illness, or did he get injured sometime? But what does Rachel care about this anyway? But damn, his eyes are so beautiful. She has never seen such eyes, and such handsome men, a special noble beauty. Thin face, high cheekbones, looks like his brother, but slightly better. It happens in families when two children look extremely alike, but one seems ordinary, and the other you can't take your eyes off. Rachel started gathering the shards. What is she even thinking about? Probably it's because of the separation from her husband. She'll soon start throwing herself at men. But she has never been like that. And then she saw those brown eyes, and now she can't get them out of her head. What nonsense. Rachel collected the shards, took them to Catherine, who apparently didn't believe her son's words. And then she went to her room. Rachel couldn't concentrate on her book. Mark's face kept coming back to her mind, and his thin, almost foreign-looking, paralyzed legs. Poor guy, so beautiful and so unhappy, living within four walls, not even going out to the garden. Rachel scolded herself immediately. She has a husband, and she's only thinking about Mark because she feels sorry for him. It's a normal human feeling. Just in case, Rachel decided to call Deacon. He didn't answer immediately. "What's up?" "I just missed you," she said softly. "I wanted to hear your voice." "I understand." From his voice, Rachel understood that Deacon was smiling. "Darling, when will the money come? I got a call about the debt. They said a lot over the phone." "Soon," Rachel panicked. "I should get it tomorrow. I'll send it right away. How's our daughter, Deacon?" "Grace is already asleep." "Okay, I'll go too. Got an interview in the morning. Maybe I'll get a job." Rachel said goodbye to her husband and hung up. For some reason, she felt uneasy, as if a storm was brewing, and something she tried not to notice was surfacing from the depths. Why is Deacon so cold with her? Why do they only talk about money lately? He hasn't said he loves her, that he misses her for so long. No, this is nonsense. He's just nervous. Tired of being brokey, tired of being unemployed, and now the whole house depends on him. And he doesn't know how to do anything. It's good that her mother-in-law agreed to help, or Deacon would live in chaos, eating only scrambled eggs. Perhaps Rachel is a very bad wife and mother, but at least she didn't lose her job. And all thanks to Mark. Thanks to Mark. She almost didn't thank him. He saved her from being fired. She should say a few words to him, otherwise it doesn't feel right. But is it appropriate? Rachel thought for a moment and decided that saying a few words is still appropriate. Looking around, she went to the stairs. Near the empty pedestal where the vase stood this morning, she paused briefly. Her mother always taught her never to lie under any circumstances. And she, it turns out, lied. Although no, Mark lied. And she just stayed silent and waited for Catherine's verdict. Maybe this doesn't count as a lie? Rachel timidly knocked on the door. "Yes?" came the response. The woman took a deep breath and entered the room. It was a studio. Mark sat in a wheelchair near the easel. Rachel couldn't see what he was painting. The canvas was facing the window. Mark smiled again, and for a moment Rachel was speechless from his smile. "Rachel, if I'm not mistaken, right? Dad mentioned you," Mark said, wiping the brush on a rag. "Yes, that's right, Rachel." Her voice was somehow hoarse and unfamiliar. "I just wanted to thank you. You saved me." "Oh, come on." He threw the brush on the table. "It cost me nothing. But these vases, they are beautiful, of course, but Rachel, nobody's life is worth breaking for them, agree? And you, as I understand it, really need this job." "Natalie told you?" Rachel blurted out. "No." Mark suddenly darkened. "Not Natalie, Dad. No. Don't think he knows more than what you told him. But I suspect if a music teacher starts making a living from cleaning, she has serious reasons for it. Or am I wrong, Rachel?" "No, you're not wrong," the housekeeper smiled. "Well, that's how it turned out. Nothing to be done." "And you sit down." Mark gestured to the couch. "Would you like some tea? I even have an electric kettle, all the amenities. I often write at night, make coffee for myself." "And is this yours?" Rachel looked around and realized that the walls from floor to ceiling were covered with landscapes and still lifes. There were portraits too. Rachel recognized Catherine, Benjamin, and Lance. Only Natalie was missing for some reason. "Yes, I draw." Mark approached the table, where there was a kettle, a jar of coffee, and a box of tea. "Tea or coffee?" "Tea. Coffee keeps me awake," Rachel said. He smiled and pressed the button on the kettle handle. There was a quiet hum. For a while, they sat in silence. Rachel scolded herself for deciding to come. God forbid Catherine finds out. She'll think Rachel is seducing her younger son after all. The second act will definitely not be forgiven. Miss your family? Mark suddenly asked. Yes, Rachel admitted, very much. I'm afraid my daughter will stop recognizing me. She won't. She loves you, Mark said. Children always love their parents no matter what. Rachel, what did you play? They started talking. Rachel talked about herself, about Grace, her funny phrases. She talked about the music she loved most in the world. And Mark listened to her, looking at her with a strange, pensive gaze, as if he saw not Rachel, but something inside her. Her soul. This thought troubled Rachel. No, he wasn't undressing her with his eyes. Nothing like that, but those eyes saw her true self, and she had no doubt about that. It was a strange, new feeling for her, strange and unusually pleasant. He also shared about himself, though not much. He studied at an art school, then at the academy. You know, when I saw the works of Quincy and Levitan in my childhood, I realized that I couldn't do anything else, Mark said. Their paintings, they seem to breathe. Yours too, Rachel said. It's incredible, creating life on canvas. Rachel, forgive me, but can I draw you? Mark suddenly asked. Is it convenient? She blushed. Catherine will scold, won't she? She won't, he winked. We'll do it in the evenings. Oh, sorry, it sounds ambiguous. I just don't go out. I'm not good with models. I can only draw members of my family. But when I saw you, well, sorry. Just, if you don't mind posing, I'll be very grateful to you, Rachel. I'll think about it, she blushed. I understand that I owe you, but I don't have such experience, you see. Suddenly, he took her hand. Rachel flinched as if shocked. Mark, realizing he did something wrong, withdrew his palms and looked at her eyes embarrassedly. Oh, sorry. Let's just say I really like your appearance, more like your type. Something from the pre-Raphaelites. Delicate features, light hair. I'm not saying this as a man, I'm saying it as an artist to you, Rachel. So, Rachel, I'll be grateful if you agree. Thank you, I'll come, Rachel said quietly. Mark brightened up. Oh, wonderful. I'll be very, very glad. Thank you very much. She said goodbye to Mark and went to her room. Rachel was tormented by a strange excitement, as if a fire had ignited inside her, warm but restless, threatening to turn into a blaze. It was both sweet and frightening feeling. What was happening to her? Was she going crazy? No, she wouldn't pose for Mark. She would say she changed her mind. She would say she didn't have time, that she didn't want Catherine to think they were up to something unclear. And Deacon probably wouldn't appreciate it either, his wife sitting in front of another man for hours. Yes, Deacon would go crazy with jealousy. Rachel firmly decided to refuse Mark's offer after all. But the next day at 11 in the evening, she timidly knocked on his door. I'm ready. I've chosen the palette, he said quietly. Put on this shirt. A pristine white shirt lay on the couch. Mark turned away to the window. Rachel hastily removed her t-shirt and changed. I'm ready, she squeaked. The young man turned around. Excellent, he said. He looked at her again with that strange expression. Let down your hair, please, and sit over there, in the armchair by the lamp, he instructed. Rachel sank into the armchair. The lamp under the orange shade cast warm highlights on her face. Strands of hair glowed with golden hues. Mark watched her, never averting his gaze. Is something wrong? She asked. Why? Everything's fine. Mark shook his head. Just thinking about the best angle. Rachel, raise your shoulder a bit, please. Yes, yes. Perfect. And stay still. He pressed a button on the cassette player. The room filled with a quiet melody. Rachel immediately recognized the Moonlight Sonata, one of her favorite classical pieces. But maybe all of this was wrong? Then why did she feel so good and warm right now? She began to visit Mark every day. He painted, and Rachel sat in the armchair, covering her legs with a blanket. And they talked. Talking to Mark was easy. Rachel's usual shyness disappeared, as if she had known him for a long time. Sometimes she even felt like maybe they had met before, like in a past life. She learned everything about him. She knew he couldn't stand dark chocolate, loved thunderstorms and the color orange. She knew that Mark had been allergic to oranges in his childhood. Rachel only didn't ask him about why he couldn't walk. Of course, she was curious about what had happened to Mark, but he never touched upon the topic, and she didn't ask. Natalie began to notice that Rachel had changed. "You're different," she said once when Rachel was cleaning Natalie and Lance's room. "Rachel, you seem to be glowing, and your eyes are sparkling." "Oh, nothing like that," Rachel giggled foolishly in response. "Are you in love with someone?" Natalie looked at Rachel with interest. "Come on, spill it. Is it our neighbor? He's into hitting on girls, but don't think he'll stick around. He's like that." No, I've seen him a couple of times. He said I have beautiful legs." Rachel rolled her eyes. "And how did he even see them? I was in my pants picking up leaves in the yard." "So who then?" Natalie squinted. "I won't tell anyone. Come on, spill it." "I'm not in love with anyone." Rachel looked away. She knew perfectly well that she couldn't lie, but she couldn't tell Natalie that she seemed to have fallen a little bit in love with Mark, just a tiny bit. And that tiny bit didn't count. Truly, Rachel only loved her husband and had no intention of cheating on him. Even imagining such a thing in a nightmare was impossible. A month passed. Rachel visited Deacon twice, spent a lot of time with Grace. Deacon, however, remained cold. He found a job standing behind the counter of a stationery store, but they paid him little, with a meager salary plus a commission from sales. The debt was gradually being paid off, but there was still a significant amount left, which Rachel was supposed to earn herself. One evening she walked into the kitchen. Chef Albert was preparing dinner. The homeowners were absent. They had gone to Benjamin's brother's birthday party. Only Rachel, Albert, and Mark were at home. Rachel was drinking tea. Albert was making a light dinner, seafood salad, and carrot pie. "Rachel, we need to talk," Albert suddenly said. "What's the matter?" she asked, surprised. "Did something happen?" "Not yet, but it might." Albert put the ready salad in the fridge and sat opposite her. "I know you've been visiting Mark. I went to see him. He didn't have time to hide your portrait. He usually covers it with cloth, but this time he forgot, apparently. Rachel, do you meet him often?" No, not at all." Rachel felt her hands tremble as she put the cup on the table. He just asked me to pose for him. I agreed. What's wrong with that?" "Rachel, he hasn't painted people in a long time and hasn't talked to anyone. And now he's changed. He hums something, even started playing his harmonica again." "On the harmonica?" Rachel couldn't help but smile involuntarily. "Yes, he used to be into it. Now he's picked it up again. I don't like it." "But why?" "Rachel, you're a grown woman, and you understand everything perfectly well. Catherine won't allow it. And you don't need this. You have a family. Mark is disabled. This family has a really complicated history. You shouldn't. Rachel, you shouldn't even try." "Me, I'm not trying," the woman exclaimed. "What are you thinking, Albert? Do you think I'm trying to seduce a wealthy heir? I just fulfilled his little request. He didn't even touch me once." "But he wouldn't refuse." Albert looked thoughtfully at his interlocutor. "Rachel, I can tell you something, but without details. If Catherine finds out I told you, we'll both lose our heads. But maybe you'll be able to look at the situation from a new angle, so to speak." "What are you talking about, Albert?" Rachel looked at the chef in confusion. "I don't understand you." "Then listen, it's all too complicated, Rachel, really." Benjamin didn't become a wealthy man right away. For a long time, he worked as a university lecturer, teaching advanced mathematics and occasionally writing scientific articles. He even published a monograph, which he was very proud of. He had a very ordinary family. His wife, Catherine, was a housewife, and they had 2 sons. The elder, Lance, and the younger, Mark. At some point, Benjamin developed a new hobby, game theory applied to economic processes. He diligently studied this area of science, made his own calculations, and published a couple of papers. And then difficult times began. They stopped paying salaries at the university. Benjamin fell into despair. He had to feed his wife and 2 children. The family's financial reserves were rapidly dwindling. Benjamin had to sell the car. Then they sold the country house that Catherine adored. Seeing his wife's tears, Benjamin decided he would definitely find a way to earn money. His family deserved the very best, and he resolved to do it. He approached one of the local businessmen directly. I know how to double, if not triple, your income, he said. Do you want to talk? At first, the businessman didn't believe Benjamin, but he managed to persuade him to meet. He presented his ideas, backed by calculations. For now, I'm doing this for free, Benjamin calmly said. I want to test my theory. If the profits increase, I hope for compensation. To Benjamin's surprise, the businessman indeed used his ideas and reached a new level. He didn't forget about his consultant. He hired Benjamin as an assistant manager. Gradually, others began to recognize Benjamin, the mathematician who could calculate both risks and consumer desires. Benjamin started earning well. He was practically passed from hand to hand, considered a genius who understood the market and could help anyone who followed his advice. Money came to Benjamin's family. The man bought a country house for his wife, gave her a car, and sent the children to good universities. Lance went to study economics, while much to his mother's displeasure, Mark chose to study art. Catherine thought it would be better for him to pursue a more reliable, grounded profession, but Mark insisted on his own path. He wanted only one thing, to paint. Art was his passion, his life, and his breath. Mark's works were really liked by his teachers. Everyone noted his talent, his ability to paint easily, vividly, and at the same time uniquely in his own style. Some even whispered that he could become a world-famous artist in time. When Mark was in his final year at university, he met Natalie. She was studying at college and had moved from the countryside, dreaming of finding her place in the big city. Mark fell in love with Natalie. It seemed to be the first time in his life. Wait, he fell in love with Natalie? Rachel asked. Wasn't that Lance's wife's name too? Listen, Albert frowned, displeased. I don't like being interrupted. Mark graduated from university and brought Natalie to meet his parents. They didn't immediately like her. Catherine even decided that Natalie was practically a streetwalker. The girl really looked the part. She loved short skirts, revealing tops, and bright makeup. Moreover, she didn't know how to behave properly. She laughed loudly. Her jokes sometimes embarrassed all the family members. She didn't know how to use cutlery properly and overindulged in the wine served with dinner. But Mark seemed oblivious to all of this, looking at Natalie with loving eyes, laughing at her jokes. And when she got drunk, simply taking her away from the table, apologizing to his family. By that time, Lance had landed a job as an economist at a major private bank, earning almost as much as his father. He was planning to marry a sweet girl named Tatey. Tatey was the complete opposite of Natalie. She was in her third year of medical school and very well-mannered. Catherine adored Lance's future bride. Benjamin slowed down the situation. He didn't want to argue with his son or discuss Mark's choices. If he wants to get married, let him, he would tell his wife. Let Mark decide. If we dissuade him now, he'll blame us for the rest of his life, saying we separated him from his one true love. Catherine resigned herself to it. Natalie now lived with them. Tati moved in as well. Both couples were heading toward marriage. Catherine began to notice something strange. When Tati was delayed at her studies, Lance spent a lot of time with Natalie. Mark didn't see this. He disappeared into his workshop and painted from morning till night. But a mother's intuition told Catherine that something was amiss. Catherine wanted to believe that her sensible son Lance would never cheat on Tatey with this uncouth girl, as she called Natalie behind her back. You couldn't exchange a diamond for cheap costume jewelry. At first, Mark had a falling out with Natalie, a serious one. No one knew the reason. Mark rarely shared details of his personal life with his relatives, but Natalie moved into the guest room, and Mark hinted to his mother that she would soon return to her own home, to her native village. Then Natalie confessed that she was pregnant and had no intention of leaving, and she wasn't pregnant by Mark, but by Lance. What? Rachel couldn't believe her ears. Yes, I was there when it happened. They were arguing so loudly the whole town could hear. The chef shook his head. So what happened next? And then the worst part. Lance broke up with Tatey, said he only loved Natalie and would marry her. Tatey came over crying. It was heartbreaking. She's such a good girl, Albert sighed. She must have loved Lance very much. But there was nothing to be done. And what about Mark? Rachel asked quietly. Well, Mark nearly lost his mind. He stopped painting, wouldn't leave his room, and then one morning he got into his car and drove off somewhere. That day, Mark got into an accident. Albert suspected that the boy wanted to die. He sped off and crashed into a tree at full speed on a deserted road. They didn't find him right away. He was unconscious, ejected through the windshield. But Mark didn't die. He had a concussion and a spinal fracture. Doctors managed to pull him back from the brink of death, but he lost the ability to walk forever. Natalie and Lance got married while Mark was in the hospital. Catherine couldn't dissuade her son from this decision. Benjamin, on the other hand, simply resigned himself to it. He didn't have the energy for it. He spent all his time with Mark, searching for the best doctors and paying for expensive medications and surgeries. Then Natalie had a miscarriage. At least, that's what she said. But why didn't Lance leave home? Living near his brother, feeling such guilt towards him, must be unbearable, Rachel wondered. Natalie doesn't want to, Albert frowned. I overheard their conversation myself. Natalie doesn't know how to talk quietly. She's always shouting. She likes living here, and Lance always gives in to her. And Catherine won't kick her son out of the house, right? I don't know what's so special about this Natalie. She's flashy, of course, bright. Maybe that's it? Rachel pondered. There was indeed something special about Natalie. She seemed ordinary at first glance, a bit childish, cute. But she spoke and looked in a special way. She even looked at Lance with a special gaze. The kind Rachel couldn't manage. She was captivating. Yes, that's right. Perhaps if Rachel were a man, she too would be captivated by Natalie. And where will Mark go? Albert continued. He sells his paintings, of course, but it doesn't bring in much money, and he's worse at painting after the accident. Benjamin said it's as if the soul has left his paintings. He paints like a robot, and that's how they live now. Lance avoids his brother. Natalie avoids Mark, too. Catherine suffers from guilt for letting Natalie into the house. And as for you and me, it's the little things. Fetching, cooking, cleaning up, and disappearing from sight. Albert, I don't want anything from Mark, really, Rachel said. Her voice trembled. We're just talking, he's painting me, and that's all. Rachel, use your head, Albert hissed. You're not a silly girl. Mark sits at home all day, saw you, maybe fell in love. Although I have no doubt about it, he even brought out his harmonica. And you'll return to your husband and daughter. And then what? I've known this family for a long time. I feel sorry for Catherine and Mark. I hadn't thought about that, Rachel admitted. But we're nothing to each other, and never will be. Think about it, Albert repeated. You don't need this. Are you going to leave your husband for Mark? Or do you think Benjamin and Catherine will welcome you into the house as a bride with someone else's child? And what will Mark feel when you leave here? Rachel, understand, they're like family to me. Benjamin hired me when I lost everything. I had my own restaurant, but competitors took it, and I ended up on the street. They took me in, essentially. Gave me a job. I worry about them. Don't get closer to Mark, Rachel, don't. I won't do it, Rachel promised. I won't interact with him anymore. Good, nodded the chef. That's the right decision. You may be angry with me, but it's the only option. Don't break his heart. Mark has been through enough, a lot. Rachel thought long and hard about Albert's words. She was terribly drawn to Mark, as if when they were together, there was something intangible, invisible to the eye. And that something was her air, her light, and the meaning of her life. But she couldn't approach him because they couldn't have a future. Rachel came to Mark for the last time. He had almost finished her portrait. As usual, she wore a white shirt and sat in the chair. Rachel looked at the lamp under the orange lampshade and tried not to cry. How pleasant the smell of oil paints was, how quiet. It seemed like she could hear him touching the canvas with the brush. Rachel shifted her gaze to Mark. How beautiful he was. She could look at him for hours. His face, his eyes, his lips. Lips she could never touch. Is something wrong? He looked into her eyes. No, why? Rachel was embarrassed. You just seem sad today, like you're not yourself and not saying anything. No, I'm just tired, Rachel said softly, struggling to hold back tears. Mark set down the brush and approached the chair. Rachel felt dizzy from his proximity. Tell me what happened. Maybe I can help. No, nothing, she sobbed. Mark, I can't come to you anymore. Why? He was surprised. Did I offend you somehow? No, why would you? She, not realizing what she was doing, took his hand. You haven't offended me in any way. You're the best in the world, really. It's just wrong. And your parents, they probably won't approve of it. Albert? Mark asked. Did he tell you something? Rachel nodded slowly, tears rolling down her cheeks. Mark lowered his head. Rachel desperately wanted to touch his hair, but she restrained herself. No. She was close, but there was a wall between them, impossible to overcome. It's an old story. He squeezed her cold fingers. Mom really worries about me too much, but she's unlikely to stand in our way. What? Rachel couldn't believe her ears. Our? Yes. He looked tenderly into her eyes. If we want to be together. Yes, you're the first woman I've been able to love. I understand that I'm disabled. I was afraid to tell you. Why would you want someone without legs? But that means nothing to me, Rachel whispered. It's just that I'm married. I have a child. Rachel, I love you, he said firmly. Just know that. I don't expect reciprocity. I don't expect anything from you in return. But I love you. She couldn't hold back anymore. She leaned towards him, hugged him around the neck, and pressed her forehead against his. And then Mark kissed her. For a long time, gently. Like Deacon had never kissed her. Rachel felt dizzy. Probably, if she were standing now, her legs would give out, and she would collapse to the floor and shatter into 1,000 pieces, like the vase that started their acquaintance. There was a knock on the door. Rachel abruptly moved away from Mark, trying to catch her breath. Yes, he said. Catherine entered the workshop. She looked sternly at Rachel. You're here? What a surprise. Mom, I'm painting a portrait, Mark said calmly. I need a model. Rachel kindly agreed to pose. Rachel understood perfectly well. Catherine couldn't fail to notice her flushed cheeks, her rapid breathing, her shining eyes. Oh God, what was she doing? Rachel, I need you, Catherine said curtly. I'm waiting for you in the kitchen. She turned sharply and left. Rachel dropped her head. Mark, I really can't, I can't do this. I understand you. He nodded, his voice trembling. And I can't offer you anything. It's not about that. She stood up. I need to change. He didn't take his eyes off her. She smiled slightly and slowly took off her shirt, feeling no shame. She wanted him to see her. Maybe it would help. After all, she wasn't perfect, and her body hadn't returned to its previous state after childbirth. There was still a little belly, stretch marks. You're beautiful, Mark said softly. Rachel silently shook her head and put on a t-shirt. She approached him, kissed him on the forehead, and then went to Catherine, confident that she would be fired today. Perhaps it was for the best. She would go home to her daughter and husband, forget about Mark and the hours spent with him, forget forever. Love isn't always a beautiful feeling, praised by poets and writers. Sometimes love is just an obstacle, like an illness that you have to endure, like the flu. Suffer a little and then return to your normal, familiar life. Catherine was sitting at the table. Her back was rigidly straight, tense like a string. She didn't offer Rachel a seat. Rachel, we've talked about this. You shouldn't flirt with my children, am I right? Yes, we have, Rachel said meekly. And what do I see? Albert told me that you run to Mark every evening. I don't know what you're doing there with him, but I can guess. Of course, the poor girl from the province decided to ensnare the wealthy invalid. My boy is lonely. He fell in love with the first girl he met. It's lucky for you. The solution to all your problems. Moving into our house as Mark's spouse, money. And I'm sure Mark will adopt your daughter if you ask him to. Am I right? Rachel remained silent. She understood that arguing was pointless. Rachel, your silence means I'm right, the woman continued. But I don't need this. We've already brought Natalie into the house, and nothing but trouble has come from her. How I regret taking you in, Rachel. I should have found an older woman. You're wrong. Rachel raised her head sharply. I never had such thoughts. I love my husband and have no intention of divorcing. Oh, so you love your husband so much that you were kissing my son, Rachel. What else were you doing there?" Catherine sneered maliciously. "I see right through you. So here's the deal, pack your things and get out of here. I'll pay you what I owe, and I'm still a decent person, unlike you." "I can leave right now and I don't need the money," Rachel replied. "You've decided to play noble with me?" Catherine laughed. "Unbelievable. And what didn't suit you, tell me? I paid well, let you go home, the conditions were excellent, and you violated our agreement." "I'm sorry and thank you," Rachel smiled. "I'm truly grateful, and you're mistaken about me." "Goodness, it's so wrong, I understand you, but why, Mark? Why doesn't he have the right to love? To have someone by his side?" "Are you going to teach me how to behave with my son?" Catherine shouted. "What's going on?" Benjamin appeared in the kitchen. "Catherine, what happened?" "She's a scoundrel." Catherine pointed her finger at Rachel. "She's getting involved with Mark. I caught them in his studio. They were kissing like teenagers. She's trying to worm her way into our family." "Catherine, calm down." Benjamin placed a hand on his wife's shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Rachel, is this true?" Rachel nodded. There was no point in lying. "Catherine, what happened exactly?" Benjamin asked calmly. "I've talked to our son, and I know how he feels about Rachel. I don't see anything wrong with them being together." "What?" Catherine looked at her husband in disbelief. "Benjamin, are you out of your mind?" "Catherine, have you decided to shield Mark from the entire world? He's alive. He's a man." Benjamin shrugged. "And Rachel, I don't see anything terrible in you." "But she has a husband and a child," Catherine exclaimed. "By the way, dear, when we met, you were married too." Benjamin winked at Rachel. She shuddered in surprise. What was happening? "Yes, I was, but I didn't have children," Catherine retorted. "And I wasn't with you because you were wealthy." "Okay, why do you think Rachel is like that? Mark told me he loves Rachel. Rachel, I don't know what you feel for him, but I'm glad. Very glad that my son has come alive. For the first time in years, he wants to create, wants to live. He wants to resume treatment," Benjamin explained calmly. "Will he be able to walk if he continues treatment?" Rachel blurted out. Benjamin looked saddened. "Nobody knows that. He quit rehabilitation. The sessions exhausted him, and sometimes it could be quite painful. But now he wants to pursue it again, and he wants to stand up. It's all thanks to you, Rachel. Catherine, if you want what's best for your son, don't interfere." Catherine shrugged off her husband's hand from her shoulder and abruptly stood up from her chair. "So that's how it is, huh? Let's see what happens when this scoundrel brings her whole family into our home," Catherine said sharply. "We'll see." Benjamin nodded meekly. Mischievous sparks danced in his eyes. Rachel even thought he looked younger. Catherine stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door loudly, while Benjamin helplessly sank back into his chair. "Yes, she's difficult," the man muttered. "I'm truly ready to leave," Rachel said. "I don't want to cause any trouble." "Do you love him?" Benjamin looked up at her. His eyes seemed to burn through her. Lying to such eyes was impossible. "Yes, I do," she replied. "It happened. I didn't want it. I understand everything." "What is there to understand?" Benjamin waved his hand dismissively. "Rachel, I won't stand in your way. I can even take the brunt of Catherine's fury on myself. I still understand people a little, unlike Catherine. She loses the ability to reason rationally when it comes to Mark, you see. If it were up to her, she'd lock him in a room with padded walls and never let him out." "I understand. I also go crazy when I think something might happen to Grace," Rachel blurted out. Benjamin smiled at her. "Keep communicating with Mark, Rachel. You have a good influence on him." She thanked Benjamin and went to her room. At night, Rachel woke up feeling strangely agitated. It was almost 3 in the morning. She threw on her robe and went to the studio. She felt like he was waiting for her. Mark was sitting in the chair staring out the window. When she entered, he turned around and reached out his hand. Rachel approached him. He pulled her towards him. She ended up on his lap. They kissed until dawn. Rachel had never experienced anything like this with Deacon. She felt both ashamed and elated. So good, like never before. Except when Grace was born. But that was a different feeling. New, immense, filling her heart. She ran her fingers through his hair, pressing herself against him, purring softly with pleasure. That night, they were the only ones in the world. Rachel fell asleep towards morning, sitting on Mark's lap, resting her head on his shoulder. Now she knew for sure that her life had changed forever. She started visiting him just to talk a little, hug, see how the work was going. Catherine seemed to pay no more attention to it. Apparently, her husband's words had the desired effect. One day, Mark said to her, "Rachel, do you understand that I may not have children?" "No, I mean, everything should work, but the doctor said the chances are slim." "I have a child," she replied. "I'd like to meet her. Will you bring your Grace?" Mark asked. Rachel pondered. It was difficult, but doable. She knew Catherine wouldn't support her, so she decided to talk to Benjamin first. "Bring her, of course," he calmly said. "You probably need to discuss this with your husband?" "Yes, I'll try," Rachel replied. But she couldn't have a conversation with Deacon. As usual, he was irritable and somewhat rude. "They pay peanuts," he grumbled. "I'm on my feet all day. Rachel, I think I should start my own business." "But you said you don't feel capable of that," she exclaimed. "Well, it didn't work out once, big deal. Do you think that's a reason to give up?" He frowned. "You're supposed to support me. You're my wife, right? Or have you found someone else there? Dumped the child on me and fooling around with someone?" "What are you saying?" Rachel exclaimed. "I haven't found anyone." She lied to him and felt infinitely guilty because his words contained a grain of truth. She really did leave him with the child. Poor Deacon was struggling while she kissed Mark and dreamed of a happy life with him. Deacon kept repeating how tired he was of work and of Grace. Rachel gave him almost all the money she earned, leaving only for the return ticket, and she said she would like to take her daughter to her owners. "Why's that?" Deacon wondered. "Well, they're elderly people. They would like to spend time with their grandchildren while they don't have any," Rachel replied, "and I want to spend more time with her too." "Well, as you wish," her husband said. "I could use a break from Grace for a bit." "Deacon, you make it sound like I'm having a blast there." Rachel shook her head. "All right, I understand it all, Rachel. After all, this will be over soon, right?" Deacon remarked. Rachel never did confess to her husband that she had met someone else, but she realized she no longer had feelings for Deacon, and he probably didn't love her anymore either. Perhaps their family simply couldn't withstand the test of separation. So there was nothing wrong with her falling in love with Mark. And if there was, she didn't want to think about it now. Rachel went back home and returned with her daughter, Grace. The little girl looked around in amazement at the garden and the cottage, hardly believing that only one family lived here. "Mom, more people could fit here," she declared. "We need to settle someone else in." "Well, you see, sweetie, everyone has different homes," Rachel explained. "Ours is just small." "Why don't we buy a big one?" Grace wondered. "But we don't have the money for that yet. Maybe we'll buy one later." Rachel lifted her daughter up. "Come on, let me introduce you to Benjamin and Catherine." Benjamin was delighted with Grace. Rachel realized he adored children. Perhaps he dreamed of grandchildren. Catherine, on the other hand, was initially standoffish, but later warmed up to Grace's charm. In the evening, the three of them played with the girl in the garden, even building a snowman. Rachel watched them from the window and thought that her life was about to change forever. She truly didn't care about money, the cottage, or the fact that Mark might never walk. She just wanted to be with him, and whatever came next, she'd do it, even if it meant washing stairwells and putting up flyers, as long as he was with her. The next day, Mark went for a walk for the first time in years. Lance, his brother, helped push the wheelchair. Natalie chose to stay in her room. Grace asked Mark why he couldn't stand up. "I can't," he confessed to the little girl. "My legs don't work." "Well, that makes it even more fun," the girl said after some thought. "It's like you have a little car." Mark chuckled. "Yeah, never thought of it that way." Rachel suddenly felt like part of this family. Benjamin looked at her with a smile. Grace sat on Mark's lap as he wheeled her through the snowy garden paths. Even Catherine seemed to thaw, though not entirely. But maybe, just maybe, everything would work out. Yes, she would hurt Deacon deeply, but living with an unloved man while giving up her own happiness wasn't an option. Deacon would survive this blow and find someone else, someone better for him than Rachel. And Christmas was coming soon. They say miracles happen at Christmas. After putting Grace to bed that evening, Rachel went to Mark. She sat on his lap, as always, wrapping her arms around his neck and resting her head on his shoulder. "Grace impressed my parents as well," the man said. "And me too, by the way. She's actually a lot like you." "Well, actually, she's more like my mom," Rachel chuckled. "In character, too. She says what she thinks." "Rachel, move in with us. I talked to my dad," he whispered in her ear. "Move in with your daughter. Live with me. Find a job in the city if you want. I'll start selling my paintings, huh?" "I need to sort things out with my husband," she said sadly. "I can't do this so abruptly. I already feel terrible about all of this." "I'm not rushing you," he kissed her forehead. "As you understand, I'm not going anywhere. By the way, I have something for you, Rachel." He put his hand in his pocket and pulled out a small box. "It's cheap, but I really like it." He handed the box to Rachel. "Don't get any ideas. I bought it a long time ago. Wanted to give it to the one. I didn't want to give it to Natalie. I don't even know why. Then I realized. This box was waiting for you." Rachel opened the box and saw a bracelet, a delicate silver chain with a heart charm. She took out the bracelet and handed it to Mark. "It's so beautiful. Help me put it on." He gently fastened the bracelet around her wrist. "I'll never take it off," Rachel promised, "and thank you, I love you." "I love you too." "I love you," Mark whispered. Rachel was supposed to spend Christmas with Deacon. Mark didn't like that. She understood him perfectly. It's hard to let go of someone you love. But Rachel decided it was the right thing to do. She didn't want to ruin Grace's holiday, and then she would talk to Deacon, try to explain to him that it would be better this way. She was scared, but she knew Mark was waiting for her. For Mark, she was willing to endure anything. Rachel was supposed to spend the week at home. They celebrated Christmas together, the three of them. Grace enjoyed the holiday, danced around the Christmas tree, held her mom's hand, and sang songs. Then the three of them watched old movies. Deacon was particularly irritable. He didn't like how loudly Grace stomped around and shouted. He scolded Rachel for buying their daughter an expensive gift, a new doll that could drink from a bottle. Such dolls had only recently appeared on the shelves and were the object of desire for all girls aged 3 to 5. Rachel couldn't admit that she bought the doll with the money Mark gave her. "Rachel, there's almost half the debt left," Deacon said, watching Grace hug the doll. "And you're buying her an expensive toy. We need to live within our means, Rachel." "I earned this," the woman snapped. "And don't forget the debt is because of you. I can't deny my daughter pleasure, you know. I have to make her happy." Deacon looked at her in bewilderment. "What? I wanted to earn for you and Grace. I wouldn't have gone into this damn trade myself. And now I'm to blame?" "Deacon, don't shout. I'm doing everything I can. What do you want from me?" Rachel said quietly so that their daughter wouldn't hear. "I want a normal family," Deacon hissed. "I see you once a month, don't know what you're up to." "It was your idea for me to get a job where they pay good money," Rachel sighed. "And you didn't object when I moved." "All right, you're not going there anymore," Deacon threatened, squinting menacingly. "Quit. I'm tired, and my mom is tired of Grace. She's old. She has to sit with the kid from morning till night while I'm at work." "Let's talk about this tomorrow," Rachel pleaded. "Deacon, don't ruin the holiday." "I'm ruining it?" The man shook his head. "You started saying it's all my fault. Fine, I'm going to bed, celebrate. If you want, go to your hosts." He got up from the couch and went to the bedroom without even wishing their daughter a good night. Rachel sat with Grace a little longer in front of the TV, then made a bed on the couch and lay down to sleep, hugging the little girl. Let Deacon do what he wants. She'll take Grace and they'll leave together for Mark. To the man who truly loves Rachel. But Rachel didn't manage to leave. The next morning, Deacon felt unwell. He had indeed lost a lot of weight while Rachel was away. She attributed this to nerves and fatigue. In the afternoon, he passed out. Rachel called an ambulance, and Deacon was hospitalized. Rachel asked her mother-in-law to stay with Grace and went to the hospital with her husband, but they sent her home. "We'll examine your spouse," the doctor said, "but don't expect instant results." "But what could it be?" Rachel asked. I don't know. I said we'll examine, but I think it's nothing serious. The doctor shrugged. Usually, after the holidays, we see many cases like this. Someone drank, ate fatty foods, and now the pancreas is acting up. Maybe it's a gastritis exacerbation, nothing to worry about. But 3 days later, it turned out to be much more serious. Deacon was diagnosed with a stomach tumor. The doctor assured Rachel that it didn't necessarily mean cancer, but she had a bad feeling, which unfortunately soon proved true. However, it was only the first stage and the doctors gave a favorable prognosis. "You're lucky," the doctor explained to her. "He got sick because of an ulcer that he ignored for many years, and the tumor was found by chance. It's like he won the lottery. Now all we need to do is perform surgery, and your husband will live for many more years." Rachel visited her husband every day, holding Deacon's hand, talking to him, and preparing him dietary meals. He had changed abruptly, as if someone flipped an invisible switch. The irritability disappeared. Deacon looked at Rachel with sad eyes, begging her not to leave him. He said he was afraid of what awaited him in the future. "It'll be okay," she repeated. "I won't leave you." She understood. She really wouldn't leave Deacon. That meant Mark would have to wait. She called Benjamin and told him what had happened. "How much?" he asked. "What do you mean, how much?" Rachel was surprised. "No, the doctor says he'll live a long time." "Rachel, how much do you owe? You said you have a debt?" Rachel named the amount. "All right, I understand you. I'll send you the money," Benjamin said. "And I'll send some for treatment too." "No, Benjamin, I don't need anything." She was scared. "You do. You'll pay the doctors and nurses to make sure everything goes well, and the medicines aren't free either," Benjamin stated in a tone that brooked no objections. "Why are you helping me?" Rachel asked softly. "My son is waiting for you. You brought him back to life, and I want you to move as soon as possible. Move in with us," the man replied. The next day, Rachel asked Deacon how to repay the remaining debt. "What?" He was surprised. "Deacon, I was given money to solve our problem," she gently replied. "Given as a loan, of course." "Rachel." Deacon looked away. Rachel gently ran her hand through his hair. "Tell me, I'll do everything," she pleaded. "Rachel, I paid off everything a long time ago, paid off." His hands clenched the blanket. "I just postponed it. I wanted my own business, wanted us to live well." "What? Deacon, why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "I was afraid you wouldn't understand, that you'd quit your job. I worked hard too. I needed startup capital. Rachel, I'm a fool." She wanted to say that Deacon was indeed a complete idiot, that he deceived her, that it was his fault she ended up in another city without money or documents, that because of him, she met Mark. But she kept silent. He was already feeling bad. Rachel had no right to scold him. Let him recover first. Then they would talk. "It's all right," she said, "but don't do that anymore. Tell me about your plans. No need to lie." "Okay, I'll never lie to you again." He turned to her, thinner, with stubble on his cheeks. Rachel's heart ached with pain. She couldn't leave him. She just wouldn't forgive herself for it, ever. "It'll be okay," she smiled. "Just believe in it, Deacon, okay?" He nodded and responded to her smile. Then followed long weeks of agonizing treatment, surgery, recovery, and complications. Deacon managed to contract pneumonia, which nearly killed him. Rachel was by her husband's side, holding his hand, feeding him spoon by spoon, changing the bedsheets. The hospital was catastrophically understaffed. She decided to call Mark and explain the situation. He was silent for a long time. Rachel was dying of fear. She was afraid of losing Mark, and she couldn't allow herself to abandon Deacon. "I'll wait as long as it takes," he finally said. "Rachel, I understand you. I wish your husband a speedy recovery." Mark's voice trembled on the last sentence. "I'll come, I'll definitely come," she promised. 2 months passed. Fortunately, Deacon was getting better. He could already walk in the hospital courtyard, holding Rachel's hand. Deacon was making plans for the future. "I want my own business, a company. We'll sell stationery. The selection in stores is small and kids want something interesting, unusual. I've already thought it all through," he said. "Studied the business inside out. You'll see we'll make huge profits, Rachel. I'll never forget what you've done for me, never." Rachel nodded, but she felt like crying out of her own helplessness and the inability to confess to her husband what was tormenting her heart. She longed for Mark, but she also felt sorry for Deacon. He often repeated that he loved her, loved Grace, that he would do anything for them. Deacon promised to buy them a house, the one Rachel wanted so badly. "I've been given a second chance," Deacon repeated. "I'll make the most of it, you hear? Make the most of it." Soon he returned home, and Rachel didn't know what to do. Should she confess to Deacon, or should she go to Mark? But she couldn't leave now when he had just recovered from a serious illness. But Rachel didn't have to make a decision. Catherine called her. "Rachel, hello. I wanted to let you know that Mark is leaving," the woman said. "What?" Rachel was surprised. "But why?" "He's going there for treatment. Benjamin found a center where they treat people like him. Mark didn't want to tell you, he thought to surprise you, but you need to know." Rachel thanked Catherine and hung up the phone, so it seemed she was staying with Deacon. Her husband was quickly recovering. And as promised, he started a business, opening a small stationery store. Deacon managed to find an excellent location near the city center, close to several schools. Children often came with their parents to their store and begged to buy funny pens or notebooks with their favorite actors on them. Rachel helped her husband. She mastered bookkeeping, managed the documents, and even cleaned the store herself to save money on a cleaner. But at the same time, she continued to think about Mark. He didn't call or write to her. This drove Rachel to despair. Had he really forgotten her so quickly? Would she never see him again? 3 months later, she had a dream. Rachel was on the riverbank, surrounded by fog, holding a candle. And suddenly, on the opposite bank, she noticed a flickering light. The fog began to dissipate, and she saw Mark. He stood on his own feet and held a similar candle. He was calling to her, but she couldn't hear his voice, and he couldn't see her at all. He tried to shout, but couldn't. The fog seemed to swallow all the sounds. And then, in desperation, Mark looked around and suddenly left, leaving Rachel alone. The woman woke up breathing heavily. Her heart pounded desperately in her chest, like a wounded bird in a cage. She spent the rest of the night sitting in the kitchen with a cup of warm tea. Rachel felt like she couldn't warm up, even though the night was warm. And during the day, Natalie called her. "Rachel, hello, you need to know," Natalie said. "What happened?" Rachel asked, frightened. "Mark passed away," Natalie whispered. "He underwent some surgery on his spine, and then blood poisoning started. He died a week ago. The funeral was yesterday." "What?" Rachel's eyes darkened. "How is that possible?" And like that, Natalie raised her voice slightly. "He wanted to get back on his feet for you and ended up dying. Insisted on the surgery. What did you say to him?" "Me?" Rachel exclaimed. "Yes, you. I hope you won't bother us anymore." Short beeps sounded on the other end of the line. Rachel looked at her, not understanding what was happening. Was this a continuation of her nightmare? She would probably wake up soon. No, it couldn't be true. Mark couldn't have died. Rachel couldn't remember what happened next. Most likely she lost consciousness. Her mother-in-law, who came to sit with Grace while Rachel worked with the documents, brought her back to herself. "What's wrong with you?" her mother-in-law asked, frightened. "Are you pregnant?" No, I'm not pregnant," Rachel quietly replied to her. "Everything is fine. I'm just very tired." The following weeks Rachel spent as if in a daze. She hardly ate, lost 10 kilograms, and couldn't work. Deacon scolded her for mistakes in the paperwork. Rachel couldn't sleep and spent nights staring blankly at the ceiling. Mark was gone. She would never touch his hair, hug him, or kiss him again. All they had were a few nights. She just sat on his lap, they talked to each other and kissed like teenagers. And he died. Because of her. Because he wanted to stand on his feet to be a real man for her. But Rachel didn't care if he was in a wheelchair. Couldn't he understand that? Then Rachel saved Tracy, an old school friend. She went to visit, saw the condition of the woman, and was horrified. "Where is your husband looking? Are you sick? Do you even sleep at all?" "I'm fine," Rachel replied to her friend. "Yeah, I can see how fine you are. Come on, spill it." And Rachel told Tracy everything, about Mark, about their short love, about his death. She talked and cried, laughed, and then began to sway from side to side like a madwoman. Tracy silently listened to her friend, and then said, "Rachel, I have a friend who's a psychiatrist. Go see him first thing tomorrow." "I don't need to see a psychiatrist," Rachel said, scared. "They'll throw me in the loony bin and I have a child. I can't afford that." "Everything will be okay," the woman rolled her eyes. "They'll prescribe you some pills. My mother was like that too after my father died. Didn't eat, didn't sleep, she had depression. She took a course of pills and came back to herself a little." Rachel was indeed prescribed pills. At first, she was afraid to take them, but she realized she had no other option. She was slowly going crazy with despair and grief. She only began to feel better after 6 months. Deacon seemed oblivious to what was happening with Rachel. He threw himself into his business, made good money, bought a car, planned a trendy renovation in the apartment. Rachel slowly recovered. She learned to laugh, enjoy little things, and cherish her time with her daughter. And a year later, she received a package from Natalie with Mark's portrait he had painted. Rachel hid the portrait in the closet. She didn't want Deacon to find it. Now the portrait and the heart-shaped bracelet were the most precious things to her. She really wore the bracelet all the time. Deacon only asked once what the trinket on his wife's wrist was. "I bought it for myself. I really liked it," Rachel replied to him. "Tasteless," he said. "Don't you have money to buy something better?" "But I like this one." Rachel touched the heart. "It's beautiful." Years passed. Deacon changed, felt like the master of life, proud of his achievements. Rachel understood to whom he owed, but preferred to stay silent. She worked more than Deacon, solved all the minor problems, and controlled the work of each of their stores. And Deacon preferred to spend time in restaurants, sometimes dropping by the casino, where he could lose a considerable amount of money. Rachel didn't care anymore. She immersed herself in work and set aside money for an apartment and Grace's education, keeping it in an account Deacon knew nothing about. She understood that she and Deacon were gradually becoming strangers. Rachel slept in a separate room, telling Deacon he snored and disturbed her sleep, and he didn't object. In reality, she just didn't like being close to him. When Grace turned 13, her husband said he was leaving her for someone else. "I hope you understand you have no right to claim any share of the business," he told Rachel. "I won't leave you without money. I'll pay child support regularly." "Deacon, I have the right to claim my share," Rachel calmly replied, "and I will do so." "Haha, what are you talking about? Where did you get the idea you'll get anything?" Deacon smirked. "You haven't done anything. It all belongs to me." But Rachel didn't give up. They had to divide the property through the court. Deacon claimed he did everything himself while Rachel lounged at home and spent time at beauty salons. Fortunately, many employees of the store network loved Rachel, and they sided with her. In unison, they assured that Rachel worked, if not more than Deacon, then at least as much. In the end, all jointly acquired property was divided into 2 equal parts, which Deacon considered a terrible injustice. He threatened to retaliate against his wife and refused to pay child support, which, however, didn't bother her at all. A new life began for Rachel. Now she had her own business, which she had grown to love. She had her daughter, the only thing that mattered to her. She had friends. Sometimes she even had short-lived romances. She felt like a perfectly happy and successful woman. Once a year, she went to the sea with her daughter, bought a car, and got her driver's license. When Grace finished school, Rachel told her, "Darling, you can apply wherever you want. I'll pay for your education." And Grace decided to apply to an art academy. Rachel wasn't surprised, as Grace was a wonderful artist and graduated from art school with honors. It wasn't easy for the woman to endure the separation from her daughter. In the first few days, she couldn't sit still from anxiety and called Grace almost every hour. Then gradually, she came to terms with the fact that her little girl had grown up and become an independent young woman. Time passed. Grace returned to her hometown and started working as a designer. In her spare time, she painted pictures that sold well and brought in good income. Rachel devoted all her time to her work. Her chain of stationery stores became one of the most successful. Rachel also knew how her ex-husband was doing. Not bad. although in her opinion things could be better, but he was too engrossed in the life of a wealthy person. There were rumors that he regularly lost some of the money that was supposed to go towards business development, but despite this, Deacon continued to stay afloat. Rachel had no desire to seek revenge or push her ex-husband out of the market, although she understood perfectly well that she could do it at any moment. And here comes a new stage in her life. Grace, her beloved, so talented, so beautiful daughter, is getting married. Her little girl has grown up. Perhaps Rachel will become a grandmother soon. It's so strange. Just yesterday, it seems, she stood at the train station, hugging little Grace, scared of having to go to another city and earn money at the pastry factory. And now she's a successful businesswoman, capable of organizing her daughter's dream wedding. This strange man, so much like Mark. Perhaps Rachel has just lost her mind. They say happiness and sorrow have almost the same effect on the brain. Maybe Rachel just went crazy? After all, Mark is no longer there. He died a long time ago. The man with the cane turned his gaze to Rachel, his eyes, brown, warm, so familiar. His eyes widened. They looked at each other, unblinking. Rachel no longer heard the music, the laughter of the guests, or the voice of the host saying something about love and fidelity. She only heard the sound of her own heartbeat. The man slowly approached her, leaning on his cane. Rachel also walked towards him. She wasn't walking, no. Her legs seemed to not touch the floor. They stopped in front of each other. "Rachel, is it you?" "Mark," she breathed out softly. He touched her wrist, which was adorned with a delicate silver chain with a heart. "Tell me, is this a dream? Yes?" "No, it's not a dream," she whispered. "But if it is, then I don't want to wake up." He embraced her. Rachel cried like a child. Mark held her tightly as if he never wanted to let go. Then a frightened Grace ran up to them. "Mom, what's wrong?" "How you've grown," Mark smiled. "I didn't recognize you." They went to Rachel. Together. Both knew they had a lot to discuss. In the taxi, they sat in the back seat, leaning against each other. And Rachel feared one thing, that she would wake up any moment and find out that there was no wedding, no Mark, and then she wouldn't want to breathe anymore. He entered her apartment. She made tea. It was strange, as if they had never parted at all. So ordinary, as if an old friend had come to town for a couple of days. Rachel sat across from him. "Mark, how is this possible?" "Sean, my colleague's son," he replied. "He invited me to the wedding. I came. I didn't know it was your daughter's." No, I mean something else. I was told you died then in the hospital." "Who said that?" Mark was taken aback. "Natalie. She called and said that you, Mark, that you died. From a blood infection, it seems. I thought you decided to have surgery to stand up for me." The man dropped his head into his hands. "Lord, Natalie, how could she? I never even thought she was capable of such a thing." It turned out that after Rachel left, Lance had a falling out with his wife. Mark didn't know what it was about, whether she started demanding too much money and gifts from him, or whether he caught her in the arms of another man. Lance threatened to file for divorce, and Mark suspected that he would indeed do it. But Natalie pulled out another trump card, claiming she was pregnant. She even showed a test with 2 stripes. Lance was adamant. He said that if a child was born, he would pay for a genetic test. If the child turned out not to be his, Natalie would be left with nothing. "And she started coming to me," Mark recounted. "I didn't want to see Natalie, but she cried. I felt terribly sorry for her, and Lance kept demanding a divorce. Natalie, as I understood it, decided to reconcile with me, but I didn't need that. And then Dad found a clinic where I could have the surgery. I agreed and left. And what happened next? I don't know." "And then Natalie called me and said you died in the hospital," Rachel whispered to him barely audibly. "And she told me that she talked to you, that you called yourself and said you weren't going to leave your husband, that you loved him. Then Mom confirmed it." "And what about your dad, Benjamin?" Rachel was surprised. "He was on your side." "He was," Mark sighed sadly. Probably both Natalie and Mom said something to him about you. He said I shouldn't chase after you, that I should start a new life after the surgery. You didn't come, didn't write or call. I thought they were right. I waited for a long time and then decided it was better for me to forget you forever. Mark returned to his art again. He took on a pseudonym under which he sold his paintings. He quickly became popular. His sad, melancholic landscapes were exhibited in international galleries. "Well, how about your personal life?" Rachel asked. "I was married," Mark admitted. "Met a girl somewhat similar to you, by the way. We lived together for 3 years, got divorced. It didn't work out. I'm to blame before her. The thing is, I was looking for you in her. But we remained friends." They talked all night. Rachel told him about her daughter, Grace, about how she also became an artist. She showed him her works, and Mark was thrilled by them. Towards morning, they went to bed. Falling asleep in his arms, Rachel felt like an utterly happy woman, as if some heavenly, invisible puzzle had come together. Or perhaps it was too late. She felt a little sorry for the time they could have spent together. "You can't sleep?" Mark asked. "No," she replied. "But what if we're too late, huh?" Mark kissed Rachel on the forehead and whispered, "Happiness can't be late. It always comes on time, my love."